Here's Jim Talamonte in the AM 560 Traffic Center.
In Logan Square on Chicago's northwest side, you may have a bit of residual congestion on California Avenue near Logan. There was a power outage and the signals were out, but the power's back on in that area. Looking at traffic on the inbound Eisenhower, it's now heavy from Harlem to East Avenue. The trip time from 390 to downtown is 30 minutes, outbound fine at 28. We see no incidents or delays on the Edens or the Kennedy right now. Inbound Stevenson, traffic is tight approaching the Ryan. 29 minutes, 355 to Lakeshore Drive, outbound 28. Inbound Ryan delays are from the Stevenson to Roosevelt. 18 minutes, 95th to downtown. I-57 has delays outbound Crawford to Cicero after overnight construction. That's traffic. I'm Jim Talamonte on AM 560 The Answer.
More of Chicago's Morning Answer comes your way next. Now your official Chicagoland weather forecast. Hazy sunshine today will go up to 80 degrees. Clear sky tonight, down to 61. Then tomorrow, mostly sunny, a little bit warmer, high of 83 degrees. Right now it's 58 degrees. Your next news update in 30 minutes. For continuous coverage of the latest news, traffic, and weather, go to 560theanswer.com. I'm Elisa Z. Now more of Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
Listen to AM 560, The Answer, online at 560theanswer.com, on the AM 560 mobile app, and your Alexa-powered smart speaker, on TuneIn, iHeart, and radio.com.
Society ever open up again? The so-called COVID trap that we're in. Tony Fauci says maybe as soon as early 2022.
Yeah,
so we can look forward to that.
I mean, why? And he says that on a Friday after all parents, have spent the first few weeks e-learning and there's no hope. And then he says, oh, yeah, things won't get back to normal until 2022 at the end of the year. And, he doesn't own a business. He's not living on day to day for his business. And all he does, I think he's a bigger media whore than Reverend Jackson and Al Sharp. He's a media whore. Are you kidding me? Any chance he could jump on the media or be on any kind of media outlet or social platform? He jumps on it more so, I think, than Reverend Jackson and Al Sharpton. So he's loving this too much. He's on the cover of magazines. He's got no fight in this game. He's 75 years old. He makes $426,000 a year.
Okay. So, but it's bigger than Tony Fauci, of course, because you have all these politicians that have seen political benefit to the lockdowns as well. Remarkably, I think even still. And so the question is, what incentives do they have to relax the restrictions? And, oh, by the way, even if they did, what's the populace's response going to be since they've been so fear-addled by the rhetoric from these politicians? And on what basis? What's the rationale going to be for relaxation? You see Andrew Cuomo, look at the case levels, hospitalization levels, case fatality rate in New York, and he's only willing to go to 25% of occupancy of restaurants. You know why? Because nobody else is doing more in a blue state. 25, 50%. We're going to walk it back slowly, even though we jumped in. We're not going to jump out. We're going to walk it back because I need to provide the perception that I'm being responsible and methodical on the way back to liberty, even though I didn't have to be methodical and responsible on the way away from liberty. It's what we've said from the beginning, what Johan, the former state epidemiologist for Sweden, said with these lockdowns and the quarantining effectively of healthy people. How do you get out?
Because then you'll look like you failed if you admit, you know what? We can go back to normal. Well, we should have, or not go back to normal. We should go back to in-person learning. Well, we should have never taken it away.
How do you get out? By metrics. Once we reach this threshold, then we can start to. That's what the phases were supposed to be. But what happened with those phases?
They moved the goalposts.
Right. It's not hospitalizations and case fatality rate. It's just cases. Well, the infections could be asymptomatic. It could be a mild illness, or it could be worse. Doesn't matter. We're going to treat them all the same. It's just a numbers game.
It says they keep lying to us.
For more on this, we're pleased to be joined by Johan Norberg, who's a documentary filmmaker, senior fellow at the CATO Institute, author of In Defense of Global Capitalism and Open, the Story of Human Progress, who has written about the so-called COVID trap, which perhaps will be more enduring than the Thucydides trap. Johan Norberg, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
So will society ever open up again? I don't know. How optimistic are you? I'm not terribly.
No, that's the question, because what is the metrics? It keeps changing all the time. Originally, they said that they had to shut everything down just to give the healthcare system time to cope with it. But once that was done, it was more vaguely flattening the curve. But when that's done, it seems like the whole point is that we should just avoid cases and deaths entirely. But what the Swedish strategy was always about was a recognition of the fact that we cannot avoid it completely. We can postpone it. We can delay cases and deaths by lockdowns. But then when you get out of it, you'll see the same thing happening again. And no one can stay down in lockdown forever or until we have a vaccine, because that would destroy the economy, the social fabric of society, the education system, mental health, and so on and so on.
And by the way, that's exactly what we've seen in Western Europe, Sweden versus Spain, France, and other Western European countries, where they have had outbreaks. Now Israel is doing a second lockdown. We saw the same thing in July with certain states here. But then you're 6 weeks removed from it, as we are now with some of those states that saw spikes in July. And you start to say, well, maybe Sweden did have it right all the time with their light touch when it came to these mandates that are sort of ascientific and particularly draconian.
That's right. And it also, the Swedish model gave some room for common sense and for people to use their own individual judgment on social distancing, on protecting vulnerable people and so on. And we can continue to say that and move that back and forth when we need more social distancing. But if you choose this repressive lockdown, it's either you go back in total or you just leave it be. But with the metrics they have, that we should keep it suppressed, keep COVID-19 suppressed, then they will have to go back into lockdowns again and delayed perhaps a little bit further, but with even more damage to society and to our kids and families. So I think it's a very dangerous strategy.
Well, one metric that was given, it was Governor Cuomo did say if they have a positivity rate under 2% for 2 weeks or more, that he would open up schools for in-person learning. And they are going to do that. But of course, now people are pushing back. And I was wondering, because I've been asking friends from Poland and from Serbia, like, what is life like there? We seem to be the only country in the world where teachers are afraid to go back to class to teach.
Isn't this is a bit strange, because this is the one area where there seems to be, if not consensus, at least a strong majority opinion among researchers that schools should be open because the damage to kids is so great, but also the children don't seem to spread the virus as much as elders do and adults do. And therefore, that should be open. And many countries have regretted that they backed away from that and shut down the schools. Now it seems like it's more politics than science here. And that's why I don't know when you get out the moment you have created that fear of going back to school.
Interesting, though, this journal piece about where we stand with the job situation in America. 6.6 million job openings in July, about as many as we had in December of last year. Also in the retail sector, despite a lot of brick and mortar store bankruptcies, you have retailers, online retailers, warehouses, home improvement stores like Home Depot that have been on a hiring binge. So retail workers' wages have actually risen at an annualized rate of 10% since February. And though we still have about 2.5 unemployed workers for each job opening, that's the same ratio we had in January of 14, 5 years after the Great Recession of 08-09. So it is a curious thing, despite these major cities in America being more or less offline, you really do have a bounce back when at least as it pertains to employment.
Yeah, and I think you should have, because there's lots of pent up demand. People have been saving lots of money during this period. Now they're getting back in, if not full force, at least some of it. And we can see sectors of the economy, as you say, growing rapidly. And then obviously you need people. we've had this problem with in many areas in Europe. We've paid people lots of money to reduce their work time, and that has created. I realize why they do that. It's a way of helping people, obviously, but it also means that you have less movement and flexibility in the economy because people stay attached to old jobs that might not be coming back. In the U.S., that has not been the case. It seems like there's more of an opening for reducing employment in some areas and moving to other places.
So, what's your prognosis when it comes to, thinking about this with some historical context in terms of coming out of this, where we are now in the West in general, as say where we were in the West coming out of a much more serious pandemic, at least in terms of death toll, the Spanish flu of 100 years ago that this is often compared to?
Yeah. Well, we didn't enter this through any kind of serious discussion or a cost-benefit analysis. We did it panicking and very emotive issues here. And I think we're going to get out of it in the same way. It's not going to be according to a particular metric. I don't think so. I don't think it'll be the scientific advice. It's going to be more like keeping up with the others. When influential players, governments, states begin to open up, others are going to start opening up as well because it will seem strange not to. And that's exactly how we got into this mess originally. When researchers looked at which places shut down entirely, and when did they do that? It's not according to where they were in the spread of the disease or number of cases or the state of their healthcare system or anything like that. It was just that they followed the herd. When someone started to shut down entirely, everybody else did. And it seems like their assessment was that it's better to be wrong if everybody else is wrong. Then use your own individual judgment and probably be right. But if you fail, you will be alone in it. Sweden is one of few places that was brave enough to do that. And I think it's paid off.
And what about, how do the people in Sweden feel about what your government officials decided with not having major lockdowns? I think the only thing you did, you stopped university students, you sent them home early, no large venues, meaning no rock concerts, and then some high schools did e-learning, correct?
Correct. And apart from that, it was mostly a recommendation. Social distancing, please don't go to work if you don't need to. Don't use public transportation unless you really have to. So it resulted in lots of social distancing, but people could use their own individual judgment and according to their individual needs as well. And that, I think, led it to be less of a politicized issue. It wasn't sort of an either-or situation, but something that gave room for common sense. And that is, I think, one of the important reasons why Swedes have supported this policy, and that their trust in both the government and the public health authority has increased rapidly during this pandemic.
And are things back to normal now? I mean, and are you a mask culture? Do you have to wear masks everywhere?
Things are not entirely back to normal. There's still some voluntary social distancing going on, but I guess if you visited Sweden, you would think it seemed like a very normal place. And for some reason, Swedes don't use face masks. And this could be just a cultural thing. It's also, there's no law about it. There's not even a recommendation from the public health authority to use it because they say that the science is unclear on this issue.
I mean, we need to get Anders Tegnell over here to have a conversation with some governors and frankly, the presidential administration too, I think. Anders Tegnell, you're a state epidemiologist, Sweden state epidemiologist. I wanted to get your take on this book that you wrote, "Open: The Story of Human Progress." The story of human progress runs concurrent with the story of free minds and free markets, and that's a more fragile thing than I think most people realize. I wonder how concerned you are that even with the move to reopen. And even if we get further down the road in the next 6 months, say there's a vaccine and we are on a more robust timeline than some of those public health experts are predicting. Are we in a place now where we've backdoored ourselves into the Cloward pivot strategy the left has always wanted to use, which is to bankrupt the system to usher in an era of government-centric, a government-centric society, be it socialist or even more authoritarian? $9 trillion in terms of response, and of course the economies of other Western nations are even in worse shape. How do we climb out of that aspect of what we've done to ourselves?
Yeah, this is actually a bit of a coincidence. I wrote my book before the pandemic, but one of my conclusions is that many golden eras in open societies historically were ruined in times of crisis. And the crisis could be an invasion, a Great Depression, or natural disaster, or a pandemic. Because then often it's like H.L. Mencken once pointed out, if the populace is alarmed, they will be clamoring for safety, and they look to the strong man, the big government, to protect them. And this often ruins that openness and the progress that comes with it. So that's one reason why I reacted early on during this pandemic, asking people to think twice before they implement these policies, because they often remain for a very long time. It's more difficult to get out of it than jump into it. Where will it leave us this time around? I'm not sure. I can see a strong public opinion opposed to many of the closures that have been taking place and the growth in government, but it'll take a lot. There will be a legacy there. But the one thing that worries me big time is that historically, this has been a fairly small pandemic. I mean, it's taken a terrible human toll, obviously, but it's in terms of cases, of mortality, it's not even as dangerous as the Hong Kong flu of 1968. And yet, we didn't hesitate to close everything down and throw many human economic liberties out the window. So my fear for the future is, with this kind of culture, what happens the next time around? If we see a more dangerous pandemic or another crisis, which we're bound to see sooner or later, will people turn to big government and strong men and authoritarians even more then? That worries me.
Yeah, the precedent that we set, I completely agree. He is Johan Norberg, documentary filmmaker, senior fellow at the CATO Institute, author of In Defense of Global Capitalism and Open, The Story of Human Progress. Johan Norberg, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Taxamica, and he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
There's only one radio show in Chicago talking about today's biggest stories and telling you what they really mean. That show is this one, Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560, The Answer.
The Lou Dobbs Financial Report is brought to you by Signature Bank, helping local businesses succeed. Visit signaturebank.bank for your commercial banking needs.
I'm Lou Dobbs. Verizon paying $7 billion